$100 billion. Just think about how vast and enormous that sum is. Of course, as you all know, he has renamed the Gulf of Mexico to his correct and proper name, the Gulf of America. He has renamed Mount Denali into Mount McKinley, part of a historic effort to restore patriotism and national pride all across this land. He has ended the weaponization of the federal government, restored the Department of Justice to its true mission of combating threats to this nation and keeping the American people safe. He has ended all federal censorship of free speech. This has been one of the greatest crises that has plagued this nation. Years and years and years of the federal government violating the First Amendment to take away Americans' right of free speech. President Trump has ended that, and he has demanded that all federal workers, all law enforcement, cease any effort to intimidate the rights of Americans or to police their speech. He has also restored the death penalty at the Department of Justice, including for illegal aliens who commit murder, including for those who murder cops, and including for all of those who threaten Americans with heinous acts of violence. The death penalty is back, law and order is back, the streets are being made safe once again.
Woo!
On the public health front,
yeah,
he has launched the nation's first ever commission, the MAHA Commission, Make America Healthy Again, following the historic confirmation of RFK Jr., to finally uncover the true root causes of the public health crisis in this country, the childhood disease epidemic in this country, the spiraling rates of pediatric cancer, and devastating childhood sickness. He has finally created a situation where the federal health agencies in this country will be focused on preventing disease, on keeping children from getting sick in the first place, not sending them to a lifetime in and out of hospitals, suffering needlessly, when we can find ways to prevent this epidemic of illness. Then, of course, on Homeland Security. Today, it is officially the law of the land, at the conclusion of the congressional notification process, that 6 Mexican cartels and 2 transnational gangs, Tren de Aragua, or TDA, and MS-13, so 8 organizations in total, are now formally designated as foreign terrorist organizations, which means that every single member of those organizations who operates on U.S. soil is now, as a legal matter, a terrorist, and they will be treated as terrorists.
Nice.
This is a sea change in U.S. policy, and this means the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security, along with the rest of U.S. law enforcement and the Department of Defense, are now operating in a legal reality where these cartels are recognized as terrorists. And there will be a whole of government effort to remove these terrorists from our soil and to degrade their ability to threaten or undermine any American security or sovereignty interests.
Finally!
Border crossings, since the day he took office, are down 95%.
Woo!
I think it's almost impossible to even describe the scale and scope of that achievement. President Trump, within days of taking office, cut border crossings 95%. And those few who have dared to cross are being either prosecuted or deported. They're either facing significant jail time for trafficking, smuggling, harboring, aiding, impeding, or they're being immediately removed from our soil. Either way, at the end of the process, they are going home. He's re-implemented Remain in Mexico, and he has obtained historic cooperation from foreign countries all around the world in accepting their deportees back. And he has used the United States military to fully seal the southern border with a historic deployment of both active duty and National Guard troops, resumed the building of infrastructure, he has opened up Guantanamo Bay, and he's using military aircraft to carry out deportations all across this country. And ICE is joining with ATF, DEA, and FBI to carry out the largest deportation operation in American history. The criminals are going home. The border is sealed shut.
Woo!
America is safe, sovereign, proud, and
Make
free.
America safe again.
Everyone in the world understands all across this planet. You do not come here illegally. You will not get in. You will go to jail. You will go home. You will not succeed.
I love it.
This is the biggest and most successful change in any area of law enforcement that this nation has ever seen, and he did it in under 1 month.
Wow! Woo, woo, woo! Well, how exciting is this?
Thank you, Stephen.
one of the things that President Trump cares most about is job creation. And it was about 7 years ago, I had the honor of joining you in this room for the first time. And it looks like we've created a lot more jobs in the last month. Look at how many people are here. My estimate is about 180, but I didn't count. So thank you. It's really an honor to be back here. I think that I just want to go over a few things and then hand it off to Mike. The first thing is that the president has told us to prioritize fighting inflation. And he had to do that because, as you know, President Biden let inflation get completely out of control. And he did it with policies that made no sense. They made no sense. A lot of times people say to us, our friends the journalists, why are you doing that? But I like to think, why did they do that? Why did they spend so much money? And then why did the Fed print so much money so that we had inflation as high as we've ever seen since Jimmy Carter?
Yeah,
so why did they do
why?
that? So we're addressing inflation. We didn't have to address it in the first term because it was always in the ones, almost always. But we're going to get it back there. And how are we doing it? Well, we're doing it with a plan that President Trump and I and others have talked about in the Oval that involves like every level of fighting inflation. First, the macroeconomic level. We're cutting spending. We're cutting spending in negotiations with people on the Hill. We're cutting spending with the advice of our IT consultant, Elon Musk. And then we're also looking into supply side things, like restoring Trump's tax cuts, maybe even expensing new factories so that there's an explosion of supply. If you have an explosion of supply and a reduction in government demand, then inflation goes way down. And then one of the things that you will is, well, when are you going to see it? Well, the first thing that you'll see when the markets believe that we're going to get inflation under control is that the 10-year Treasury rate goes down, because that's how they think about future expected inflation. And so we're still going to see some memory of Biden's inflation. It's not going to go away in a month. But the 10-year Treasury before the last consumer price index had dropped about 40 basis points. 40 basis points because markets were optimistic about our ability to fight inflation. 40 basis points is kind of not a fun thing to say. Economists talk that way, I apologize. But the way to think about it is, for a typical mortgage, if that affects the mortgage rate, then it's going to save a typical family buying a house about $1,000 a year. And that's just in our first month. Okay. The second thing we've done is we've had a lot of trade talks. In fact, I was just meeting a minister from Mexico with Howard Lutnick just a couple of hours ago. And we're talking about reciprocal trade, and we're also talking about the fentanyl crisis. And so reciprocal trade is about our government treating other governments to treat us. We want trade to be fair. It turns out that Americans have been disadvantaged by foreign governments over and over, and President Trump wants it to stop. And the fact that struck me as most noticeable when I started to look at what President Trump was asking us to do is that last year we have data, U.S. companies paid $370 billion in taxes to foreign governments. $370 billion. Last year, foreign multinationals paid us $57 billion.
Oh, that's terrible.
We have 1/4 of world GDP. They have 3/4 of world GDP, and we're paying 370. They're paying 57.
Unbelievable.
This is not reciprocal. We're going to try, or we're going to fix it. The other thing that we've done is we've had an all-of-the-above energy approach that's led by Doug Burgum and Chris and a really large team, EPA. And we've already made so many actions that are going to affect the price of energy and lower inflation. We've opened up 625 million acres to energy exploration. We've cut 50 years of red tape that makes it so you can't have permits. And we've even made it so that when you go home, if you get a new one,
Hi,
then
New
you can
York
take
Devs.
a shower or flush a toilet or read under a light bulb. We're doing that too.
Nice.
So finally, let's just think about like the facts that we can see right now that we think are awesome. So guess what? Small business optimism has gone up by the most ever since President Trump came in. ISM, which is the measure of what's going on in manufacturing, it's expanding again for the first time in years. CEO confidence is the highest it's been in years. And the reason people are thinking this is that our policies give people cause for optimism. And then I want to reiterate what Stephen Miller said, because it's so important, and it's so important for financial markets to start to digest this. That
It's so beautiful here.
the Treasury Secretary or any cabinet secretary with Elon Musk is able to find some savings, say $100 billion. Well, in CBO land, that's actually like about 10 times that, or maybe 12 times that over a 10-year window. And so when you're thinking about the negotiations right now over reconciliation and thinking about, well, 4 trillion, 5 trillion, well, those numbers in terms of the savings are going to end up being small in all the ways that we're finding. And so we're incredibly optimistic about the future of inflation and the future of our economy. And we're optimistic because we're making so much progress so far, and we already see it in marketplaces. And with that, I'll hand it off to Mike. Thanks.
Well, good afternoon. What a month, and what a sea change in our foreign policy. In addition to what we're doing on the border and restoring American sovereignty, in addition to what we're doing in our economy and the job creation and the inflation reduction, we are bringing the world back to where it was at the end of President Trump's first term, which is a world
We're coming
of
into
peace,
Deerfield
prosperity,
Beach.
and looking forward and getting us out of the chaos
Deerfield.
that we've just seen over the last 4 years. So over the last month, just to name a few, I had the honor of sitting in the Oval Office as President Trump spoke with President Putin, and then immediately spoke with President Zelensky, and both of them said only President Trump could bring both sides of the table, and only President Trump could stop the horrific fighting that has been going on now for the better part of 4 years, and that only President Trump could drive the world back to peace. Both of those leaders said that in back-to-back calls. And of course, we just had our historic talks mediated by our good friends and partners, Saudi Arabia. We give great thanks to Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman for hosting, and sat down for the first time in years with the Russians and talked about a path forward with peace. On top of that, and one of the things that led to that was the tremendous confidence building measure that we had with the release of Mark Fogel. I'll remind everyone, the last time that we had an American released from the Russians, either we gave up a deadly spy, pressured our allies to give up a lethal killer, or we released, under the Biden administration, the world's most notorious arms dealer, Victor Bout, who, by the way, had one of his main clients for arms, the cartels in Mexico and Central America. We gave up none of that. This was released as a confidence-building measure, working with our great Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, and our Secretary of State as a first step towards opening these talks and then moving forward towards peace. On top of that, we've secured, just in a month, the return of 12 American hostages from Russia, from Bulgaria, from Venezuela, the Taliban, and Hamas. Excuse me, that's from Belarus, not Bulgaria. We also had, for some time, we took out a senior leader of ISIS, an international financier and recruiter that the military had been trying to take out for quite some time, and wasn't able to do so, frankly, because of a bureaucratic approval process. President Trump said, take him out, and that ISIS financier and leader is no longer on this earth. We've also taken action to eliminate other terrorist organizations in the Middle East. We drove, before the president was even in office, he started talking consequences for people that would hold Americans. Heretofore, there's been nothing but upside. You take an American, you get some better deal. You take another one, maybe you get a better deal. No more. There's now nothing but downside for taking Americans illegally, either as hostages or illegal detainees. And when President Trump sent a very clear message across the Middle East, but particularly to Hamas, that there would be all hell to pay, we suddenly saw a breakthrough. And now we just saw the release of yet another group of hostages. There have been dozens now, including 2 Americans that we've seen once again reunited with their families. As part of the talks with King Abdullah, he offered, and I think the entire world is graciously accepted, to take 2,000 sick children, cancer patients, and others out of Gaza as a humanitarian gesture. 2,000 Gazans will come out of that hellhole that it is, that wasteland that Gaza is right now, with unexploded ordnance, with debris everywhere, with no sewage, with no water, and President Trump has put forward a plan to deal with the practical reality that is 1.8 million Gazans now truly suffering. And then, just to bring it back to our own hemisphere, we've seen literally in the last month, after years of national security experts, the generals in charge, and others testifying and ringing the alarm bells about the Chinese Communist Party's presence in our own hemisphere, particularly in the Panama Canal. We're seeing the leadership of Panama step away from the Belt and Road program, move away from China and back towards the United States, and even enter into talks and other negotiations about addressing the ports on either side of the canal. And then finally, last but not least, we've had 4 world leaders in the White House, in the Oval Office. We've had the Prime Minister of Japan, the Prime Minister of India, the King of Jordan, and of course the Prime Minister of Israel. Just in the last 4 weeks. And next week we'll have the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, and we'll have the President of France, Macron. So President Trump is on what we call Trump warp speed. We are all honored to be really serving under his leadership and his vision, and truly, when we all say, and the president himself says he is a president of peace. He is a president focused on restoring stability. I think the entire world saw what the world would look like without strong American leadership in the last 4 years. And it's truly been an honor to get us back to where we were and back on track under President Trump's leadership.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you. Thank you, everybody. I'm sure you're very eager to ask questions of these very smart people working very hard on behalf of the president. We do have somebody in our new media seat today. We have John Stoll, who is the head of news at X. As you all know, you're all on X. It's home to hundreds of millions of users, a large contingent of independent journalists and news organizations across geographies and political spectrums. And at the same time, X remains the go-to platform for many legacy news outlets. And I know, as I mentioned, many of the reporters in this room use X to attract eyeballs to your work. Prior to joining X, John spent 2 decades in journalism, including several years as an editor at the Wall Street Journal. We are excited to have room today. John, we'll let you kick it off. And as I said at the top, please direct your question to the individual up here who you'd like an answer from. John, why don't you begin?
All right, thank you very much. I am sitting in for a thriving ecosystem of journalists, independent and emerging news organizations.
Woo! New news!
For publicity, for a business model. And so I look forward to seeing many
I'm glad you're here, Debs.
in months and years to come. I also thank you, Caroline, for opening this seat up to new media. It really is a testament not only to your open-mindedness, but also
I hear you, girl.
That you'd actually think about,
my too.
Folks that are not traditionally credentialed to be in this room, and not only have a question, but also to witness. This is a very important intersection of power and the free press. And so just the ability to witness this and be part of it, it brings everybody's game up. So I think this is for my question is about Ukraine.
Sure.
For about more than 10 years, I've been fascinated, like many, with what's going on.
Love you, girl.
In Northern Europe, working out of the Baltics when Crimea was
Red
annexed.
Reef Park. That's a beautiful park.
A lot of this came on Twitter. The platform used to be known as Twitter. A lot of European leaders would talk about their disappointment and solidarity with Ukraine. But when it came to actually doing something, it felt like they were passing a hot potato and sent it over the Atlantic. I wonder how much of what we're seeing right now out of the administration of President Trump is a call to Europe and the European leaders and the allies that we've traditionally had to pick up that hot potato and start doing something a little bit more concrete to win and preserve the peace in Ukraine. The second question I have is,
limbo.
It's related. There's been a lot of speculation in that President Trump and the administration might be manipulated by Vladimir Putin. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about the administration's posture and your confidence in the competence of this administration to go toe-to-toe with Vladimir Putin.
Well, I'll take the second question first. If there's anybody in this world that can go toe-to-toe with Putin, that could go toe-to-toe with Xi, that could go toe-to-toe with Kim Jong-un, and we could keep going down the list. It's Donald J. Trump. He is the deal maker in chief. There is no question that he is the commander in chief. And I, for one, and I think all Americans and around the world should have no doubt about his ability to not only handle Putin, but to handle the complexity of driving this war to an end. And then on your first piece,
Get ready for the ocean.
I'll take you back to 2014. You're right, there was a lot of hand-wringing in Europe and not a lot of action. There's also a lot of hand-wringing here in Washington under the Obama administration and not a lot of action. They literally threw blankets at the problem. And so I'll remind everyone that Putin had some type of conflict, invasion, or issue with their neighbor under President Bush with Georgia, under President Obama with Ukraine 2014, not under President Trump 45, and again with President Biden in
Most
2022.
peaceful
The war
president
should have been
ever.
deterred. The war should have never happened, and I have no doubt it would not have happened under President Trump, and will stop under President Trump again. But I just want to push back on this notion of our European allies not being consulted as we've entered into this process. I already mentioned the immediate phone call President Trump made to President Zelensky. He has talked to President Macron of France repeatedly last week. President Macron convened European leaders and then is coming here on Monday. Prime Minister Starmer is coming next Thursday. I've talked to every one of my national security advisor counterparts across the spectrum in Europe. I've talked to Secretary General Rutte, the leader of NATO, the Secretary General of NATO. We have repeatedly, oh, by the way, we had half our cabinet, 7 cabinet officials, including the vice president, at the Munich Security Conference, all engaging, all listening, and all making sure our allies are heard. However, we've also made it clear for years, decades even, that it is unacceptable that the United States and the United States taxpayer continues to bear the burden, not only of the cost of the war in Ukraine, but of the defense of Europe. We fully support our NATO allies.
We're
We fully
Boca
support
Raton.
the Article 5 commitment. But it's time for our European allies to step up. And one of the things that Secretary General Rutte said on our call was, this last couple of weeks have been a real wake-up call. And I asked him, what have you been missing the last couple of years? The fact that we are going to enter into a NATO summit this June with a third of our NATO allies still not meeting the 2% minimum, a commitment they made a decade ago, literally a decade ago, with a war on their doorstep, the largest war that they're all extremely concerned about, but yet it's, well, somebody else needs to pay. We've got other domestic priorities. It's acceptable. President Trump's made that clear. And the minimum needs to be met. We need to be at 100% in this June at the NATO
big
summit.
houses in Boca.
And then let's talk about exceeding it, which is what President Trump has been talking about with 5% of
There's
GDP.
a mansion.
Europe
Yeah.
needs to step up for their own defense as
There's
a partner.
another
And we
one.
can be friends and allies and have those tough conversations.
Look at the mansions.
Thank you, Caroline. I have a Ukraine one and a Doge one. Who can talk Doge? All of us.
Doge rocks.
So, we're hearing about the Doge dividend checks that would be 20% back to taxpayers, 20% to pay down the debt. 60% is left. Who gets that?
Well, the way that it works is when you achieve savings, you can either return it to taxpayers, you can return it to our debtors, or it can be cycled into next year's budget, and then it just lowers the overall baseline for next year. So in other words, you can just transfer it into the next fiscal window and then lower the overall spending level.
Can we do all
And that
three?
You have a permanent savings that way, and that reduces the deficit.
And when is it that people might see those checks?
Well, this is all going to be worked on through the reconciliation process with Congress that's going underway right now. As you've seen, the Senate's moving a bill, the House is moving a bill. The President has great confidence in both chambers to deliver on his priorities. I would just take this opportunity to note that President Trump has made a historic commitment to the working class of this country to fight for major tax relief and major price relief. And
Billionaires
cutting
Row. Well, one of
taxes
them.
is the key to
Look at
delivering on
these
both of those
homes.
promises, and President Trump is resolutely committed to doing both.
Who lives here?
This is for Mike.
Sure.
After the president's post on Truth Social yesterday, need to know, Who does he think is more responsible for the Russian invasion of Ukraine, Putin or Zelensky?
Well, look, his goal, Peter, is to bring this war to an end, period. And there has been ongoing fighting on both sides. It is World War I style trench warfare. His frustration with President Zelensky is that you heard is multifold. One, there needs to be a deep appreciation for what the American people, what the American taxpayer, what President Trump did in his first term, and what we've done since. So some of the rhetoric coming out of Kyiv, frankly, and insults to President Trump were unacceptable, number one. Number two, our own Treasury personally made the trip to offer the Ukrainians what can only be described as a historic opportunity. That is for America to co-invest with Ukraine in their minerals, in their resources, to truly grow the pie. So case in point, there's a foundry that processes aluminum in Ukraine. It's been damaged. It's not at its current capacity. If that is restored, it would account for America's entire imports of aluminum for an entire year. That one foundry. There are tremendous resources there. Not only is that long-term security for Ukraine, not only do we help them grow the pie with investments, but we do have an obligation to the American taxpayer in helping them recoup the hundreds of billions that have occurred. So, rather than enter into some constructive conversations about what that deal should be going forward, we got a lot of rhetoric in the media that was incredibly unfortunate. And I could just tell you, Peter, as a veteran, as somebody who's been in combat, this war is horrific. And I think we've lost sight of that, of the literally thousands of people that are dying a day, families that are going without the next generation. And I find it kind of, frankly ridiculous. So many people in Washington that were just pounding the table for a ceasefire in Gaza are suddenly aghast that the president would demand one and both sides come to the table when it comes to Ukraine.
They're
A war
warmongers.
that has been arguably far greater in
They're
scope
thieves.
and scale, and far more dangerous in terms of global
Money
escalation to
launderers.
U.S. security.
And I do have one for Caroline.
Hi, Gracie.
Does President Trump
Thank you for the
have a
hugs.
bet
Hugs back,
with
girl.
Trudeau about this USA-Canada hockey?
Yeah, we own the
And when
pie.
there is a big hockey game on, is the president watching for the goals or for the fights?
Probably both. I think
goals
he's
are the
watching
fights.
for the United States to win tonight. I know he talked to the USA hockey team this morning. He talked to the players after their morning practice around 10 o'clock. And I also spoke to some folks from that team after. They were jubilant over President Trump's comments to the team. I believe they're going to put out a video of that call. So we look forward to the United States beating our soon-to-be 51st state, Canada.
It drops out from
Bloomer,
time to
go ahead.
time. The audio, that is.
Zelensky that just wrapped up, and in particular, Zelensky publicly rejected this deal about the rare earth minerals. Where does that stand?
Well, we're going to continue to have, he needs to come back to the table, and we're going to continue to have discussions about where that deal is going. Again, we have an obligation to the taxpayer. I think an opportunity. The president thinks this is an opportunity for Ukraine going forward. There can be, in my view, nothing better for Ukraine's future and for their security than to have the United States invested in their prosperity long term. And then a key piece of this has also been security guarantees. Look, the reality that we're talking about here is it in Ukraine's interest? Is it in Europe's interest? It certainly isn't in Russia's interest or in the American people's interest for this war to grind on forever and ever and ever. So a key part of his conversation was helping President Zelensky understand this war needs to come to an end. This kind of open-ended mantra that we had under the Biden administration, that's over. And I think a lot of people are having a hard time accepting that. And then the other piece is there's been discussions from Prime Minister Starmer and also President Macron about European-led security guarantees. We welcome that. We've been asking Europe to step up and secure its own prosperity, safety, and security. So we certainly welcome that, and we certainly welcome more European assistance, as I told my counterparts, come to the table with more if you want a bigger seat at the table. And we've been asking for that for quite some time.
And is Russia pushing for sanctions in your talks with them? And have you consulted with international partners and allies about potentially rolling back sanctions in these negotiations to end the war?
The talks with our Russian counterparts, both with my counterpart, the National Security Advisor, Secretary Rubio's counterpart, the Foreign Minister Lavrov, it really was quite broad, focused on what is the goals for our broader relationship, but very clear that the fighting has to stop to get to any of those bright goals. And as a first step, we're just going to do some common sense things like restore the ability of both of our embassies to function. And again, this is common sense. In foreign policy world, they call it shuttle diplomacy. We have to talk to both sides in order to get to both sides to the table, and both sides have said only President Trump could do that.
Deanna.
Thank you. My question is for Mike Waltz.
All right.
This house is for sale.
The president has
In case
called
you're
Zelensky a
interested.
dictator. Does he view Putin
Hi,
as a
Sheila.
dictator? And
Love you, girl.
does he want Zelensky out of
I was
power?
just
know
thinking
he's
about
called
you.
for elections. And then thirdly, the head of the Defense Committee in Ukraine's parliament just has claimed that the U.S. has stopped selling weapons to Ukraine. Is that true?
Well, most of our weapons that have gone to Ukraine have been part of a drawdown authority where we've literally taken them out of our stocks and then eventually through appropriations started buying them again to refill our stocks. I'll just state that there has been a lag in a lot of that process. So many of our stocks, as we look at our operations around the world, are becoming more depleted. That's one of the reasons many people have had a lot of concern about when does this end? How much is it going to take? How many lives will be lost? How much will we spend? As a member of Congress, we repeatedly asked the Biden administration those questions, and we never got a satisfactory answer. Look, President Trump is obviously very frustrated right now with President Zelensky. The fact that he hasn't come to the table, that he hasn't been willing to take this opportunity that we have offered. I think he eventually will get to that point, and I hope so very quickly. But President Trump is, as we made clear to our Russian counterparts, and I want to make clear today, he's focused on stopping the fighting and moving forward. And we could argue all day long about what's happened in the past.
Reagan.
Yeah,
What about
Excuse me, I just called on Reagan. Reagan, go ahead.
I have a question for Stephen and a question for Mike. Stephen, I can start with you. There have been reports that Trump is unhappy with the rate of deportations and he wants them to be higher. Is the president happy with the rate of deportations, and are there any plans to speed up the process?
Well, first of all, we all appreciate from the media to deport as many illegal aliens as humanly possible. So thank you, and I will promise you that the full might of the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, the Department of Defense, and every element and instrument of national power will be used to remove, with speed, all criminal illegals from the soil of the United States of America, to enforce final removal orders, and to ensure that this country is for American citizens and those who legally belong in this country. We inherited an ICE that was completely shuttered. We inherited a Department of Homeland Security whose sole mission was to resettle illegal aliens within the United States of America. In 30 days, the president sealed the border shut, declared the cartels to be terrorist organizations, has increased ICE deportations to levels not seen in decades, and we are shortly on the verge of achieving a pace and speed of deportations this country has never before seen. Thank you.
Mike, there have been reports that there's some underground opposition to Trump's pick for Undersecretary of Defense and Policy, Elbridge Colby. Have you or anyone from the administration been personally lobbying senators to support Elbridge Colby?
Look, I've worked with Bridge Colby in the past. He has the president's full support to be the Undersecretary of Policy, which will be a critical policy arm for Secretary Hegseth going forward that will implement all these. And really, that's been to the extent of it. I think there's been a lot of kind of breathless, back and forth in the press, but we're full speed ahead to get the president's team in place so we can implement his America First policy.
Thank you. Mike has spoken pretty extensively. Does anybody have questions for Stephen or for Mr. Hassett? Nobody wants to talk about the economy? Sure. IRS? Okay, go ahead.
This would be for either one of you. So we reported, several other outlets have reported that about 3,500 people are due to be lose their jobs at the IRS by the end of the week. If the goal of these spending cuts across the federal government has been to reduce the debt, why impose some of the deepest cuts we've seen so far at the agency responsible for raising revenue for the federal government?
Well, I think our objective is to make sure that the employees that we pay are being productive and effective, and there are many, more than 100,000 people working to collect taxes, and not all of them are fully occupied. And the Treasury Secretary is studying the matter and feels like 3,500 is small and probably can get bigger, especially as we improve the IT at the IRS. And so I think that it's absolutely something that is on the table for good reasons. And the point is that don't just talk about the IRS, talk about all of government. That there are so many places. I live in DC. You maybe live in DC, where nobody's going to the buildings. People aren't commuting because nobody's doing their job. We look back and we see that there are all these people doing 2 jobs while they're getting a government payroll on the payroll. So the point is, we're fixing that, and the IRS is a small part of that picture.
So you're saying that everybody who's being let go was doing a bad job?
I'm saying that we're studying every agency and deciding who to let go and why. And we're doing so very rationally with a lot of support from analysis.
Because we're being told by a lot of people who have been let go at other agencies that they were being dismissed because of poor performance, when in some cases they haven't even had a performance review yet because they've only been on the job a couple of months.
Yeah, I've never seen a person who was laid off for poor performance say that they were performing poorly. Okay.
Good point.
Sure, Kate.
I have a question. I'll start with you, Kevin Hassett. Thank you for being here. And then I've got a question for Mr. Waltz. On these potential checks that you might send out from DOGE, is there a concern as you're thinking through this that they could be inflationary?
Oh, absolutely not. Because imagine if we
They would
don't
be
spend
stimulating the
government money and
economy.
get it back to people. Then if they spend it all, then you're even. But they're probably going to save a lot of it, in which case you're reducing inflation. And also, when the government spends a lot, that's what creates inflation. We learned that from Joe Biden. And so if we reduce government
We
spending,
sure
then
did.
that's reduces inflation. And if you give people money, then they're going to save a bunch.
Caitlin
And
Collins
they
asks
save it,
stupid
then that
questions.
also
I'm
reduces
sorry,
demand.
but she's an idiot.
Okay, so you're not worried about it.
Hi, Annie.
To follow up on Peter's question, you wrote in an op-ed in the fall of 2023 that, quote, Putin is to blame, certainly like Al-Qaeda was to blame for 9/11. Do you still feel that way now, or do you share the president's assessment as he says Ukraine is to blame for the start of this war?
Well, it shouldn't surprise you that I share the president's assessment
Yeah.
on all kinds of issues. What I wrote as a member of Congress was as a former member of Congress. Look, what I share the president's assessment on is that the war has to end. And what comes with that? What comes with that should be, at some point, elections. What comes with that should be peace. What comes with that is prosperity that we just offered in this natural resources and economic partnership arrangement, an end to the killing, and European security and security for the world. The president's not only determined to do that in Europe, he's determined to do it in the Middle East. And just a few months ago, we had an administration that had tried for 15 months. Week after week, sitting with you here and couldn't get our hostages out. Now we're at that point. We're back to maximum pressure on Iran.
Most peaceful
And
president ever.
We have just begun, and we will drive towards a ceasefire and all of those other steps. I'm not going to pre-negotiate or get ahead of the sequencing of all of that. It's a very delicate situation. But this is a president of peace, and who here would argue against peace?
Okay, so you do share that.
And we're still in Delray
In
Beach.
2017, then President Trump. Can I just follow up
Thank
really
you.
quick?
So,
just had 2 questions. Meg, can I just go?
Mr.
I have an important
Hassett.
follow-up. Jordan, go ahead.
So, Mr. Hassett, you were speaking about tariff revenue, and you also addressed a question about the IRS. President Trump has spoken about replacing income tax with tariff revenue, especially with all this waste, fraud, and abuse that we're seeing cut. Is that a possibility?
Absolutely, and in fact, if you think about the China tariff revenue,
The lying
estimate
media.
is coming in from the 10% that we just added, plus the that it's between $500 billion and $1 trillion over 10 years is our estimate. And that's something that is outside of the reductions that markets are seeing through the negotiations up on the Hill. And so we expect that the tariff revenue is actually going to make it much easier for Republicans to pass a bill, and that was the president's plan all along.
I have a question for Stephen Miller about Doge.
I love this road. Look at this.
Doge,
Look how cute.
You said roughly
It's like a tunnel.
$50 billion is set to be cut in a year.
Oh, wait, there's the ocean.
Waste, fraud, and abuse by unelected bureaucrats. We're hearing this ironic narrative from the president's critics and the left-wing media that Elon Musk is an unelected bureaucrat and he's doing all this terrible stuff. Isn't one of Doge's objectives to get rid of the federal bureaucracy, the deep state, and also who was running the White House when Joe Biden was in office? Because I don't know a single person who believes it was Joe Biden.
Good question.
To say the very first things about some of our media friends. Yes, it is true that many of the people in this room for 4 years failed to cover the fact that Joe Biden was mentally incompetent.
Ha! Take that!
Not running the country.
Lying media.
It is also true that many people in this room who have used this talking point that Elon is not elected fail to understand how government works.
Neither is
So I'm
George
glad for the opportunity
Soros.
For a brief civics lesson. A president is
Bill
elected by
Gates.
the whole American people. He's the only official in the entire government that is elected by the entire nation, right? Judges are appointed, members of Congress are elected at the district or state level, which is one man. And the Constitution, Article 2, has a clause known as the vesting clause, and it says the executive power shall be vested in a president, singular. The whole will of democracy is imbued into the elected president. That president then appoints staff
You're right, Annie.
to then impose that democratic will onto the government. The threat to democracy, indeed the existential threat to democracy, is the unelected bureaucracy of lifetime tenured civil servants who believe they answer to no one, who believe they can do whatever they want without consequence, who believe they can set their own agenda no matter what Americans vote for. So Americans vote for radical FBI reform, and FBI agents say they don't want to change. Or Americans vote for radical reform in our energy policies, but EPA bureaucrats say they don't want to change. Or Americans vote to end DEI, racist DEI policies, and lawyers in the Department of Justice say they don't want to change. What President Trump is doing is he is removing federal bureaucrats who are defying democracy
Did he say
by failing
bureaucrats?
to implement his lawful orders, which are the will of the whole American people. Thank you.
Thank you
Amen.
very much, everybody. I'm looking at the clock. We've almost had an hour of time. I know a couple of these individuals have a meeting to get to at 2 p.m. So you're welcome to follow up with my team for further questions. We're going to let these guys get back to running the United States government. And we will see you all later. President Trump will be speaking at 3 o'clock at the Black History Month reception. So thank you. It's good to see you. We'll see you in a bit. Thanks.
Hey, Coke Mose.
All right, so watching live coverage from the White House press briefing as we're 30 days into President Trump's second administration.
1 month, so much has changed. Unbelievable. 1 month.
Stephen Miller and other White House
What a
officials.
difference a month
including,
makes.
The White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt, of course. So a lot more to come here on
Love
Lightside
Caroline.
Broadcasting Network.
Love
Of
her.
course, one of the streams is CPAC, so if you'd like to check that out. Also, another stream is the
Briny
Capitol
Breezes.
Final vote on the Senate floor. That's
Little
starting to
tiny
happen right now, so you can go ahead and click over there
neighborhood.
if you'd like to watch that. And also later tonight at 6:30 Eastern, we'll have
Small
coverage for
town
President
Florida,
Trump
right here.
speaking at the Republican Governor Association. So that's the latest that we have here. A lot of coverage, of course. Stay with Right Side Broadcasting Network on Rumble, YouTube, X, Facebook, Truth Social, wherever you are watching right now. Thank you so much for doing so. As it's about the top of the hour, we're just going to thank a couple of sponsors here. Colonial
Well,
Mills,
Coke
one of the
Mose,
great
you're wrong
sponsors of the
about
network.
Trump. He's not rude and he's not
freegold.com is where to go to
egotistic
get that
at all.
Free info kit.
You've been listening
Also,
to
we have
the
a number of
mainstream
other
news
sponsors,
that lies to you.
Double check which ones for this broadcast at this point.
We
I
love
can
Trump
tell you,
on the Beach
we're
Report
grateful, of course,
because
for
he's
every,
saving America.
sponsor that we have at the
And he
network.
saved
Thank
us
you to
from
see
all
them
these
right here,
criminals
in just
who literally stole all our money.
All right, so right core as well. Just go to my right
And he's not rude. He tells the truth. And that's not rude. It's needed. Those who don't like Trump have been lied to. No, Trump's not a god. Nobody thinks he's a god. He is serving the people better than anybody ever has in this country. He is amazing, and he loves the American people. Nobody's worshiping him like a god. That's another talking point on the left. They like to claim that we think he's a god. We do not think he's a god. We love God, and we worship God.